I've never known this happen in Cheshire Police previously, and in fact I've never known it happen anywhere across the country. There's no other investigation like this, so I think it was very important to pick the right staff for this role due to dealing with anxieties of all the witnesses, and the staff have been excellent. My role was to engage with the witnesses, speak to the staff at the NNU and explain what we could do for them on the run-up to the trial. The first struggle we had was the anxiety levels of the staff. All of the staff had worked alongside the defendant for a period of time. Some of them were actually friends with her, so we had to get an engagement and build rapport with them. I went in a number of times with my staff to introduce ourselves and to tell them what they could expect from us, what standard of service they could expect. Some of that was initially met with negativity.
You'll be doing society a favour. That son of a bitch is brave and getting braver. We wanna put his ass in the stir. We wanna pin this triple murder on him. He ain't no gentleman, Jay.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little more about Dr. A and his role in the Lucy Letby case, focusing more on how he's been dealt with by the police, the court and Thirlwell inquiry. I'm then going to go on to discuss Article 6 rights and the tension from some parts of those with this case. Caroline Cheetham and Liz Hull devoted an entire episode of their trial podcast to Dr. A, so let's start by recapping a little of what they said.
Dr. A has been referred to quite frequently in this case so far, and for those of you who have been following us, you'll be very aware of his involvement in many of the babies in this case when they collapsed. And we know from Facebook and WhatsApp messages, which have been shown to the jury, that he and Lucy Letby were pretty close. We know that Dr. A had been involved in trying to resuscitate some of the babies who collapsed.
Yes, we already knew that on a number of occasions when babies on the unit collapsed, it was Dr. A who was crash bleeped to attend. Mr. Johnson referred to Dr. A as her boyfriend, and he insisted she had a crush on him. He accused her of enjoying being in a crisis situation with him.
Did you enjoy being in these crisis situations with Dr. A?
No. Described in court as her boyfriend, although she said they were just friends and that she loved him as a friend. But what we know is that he's married, but they texted long into the night on many occasions.
Yeah, so they went on trips to London together, he bought her chocolates, he let her use his car to get home.
And the jury was shown text messages between them, arranging to meet up later that day, which they'd both signed off with a love heart.
Dr. A was granted anonymity by the court at an early stage. Note here that Nicholas Johnson explicitly states that Lucy Letby's feelings towards him were unrequited, meaning Dr. A didn't share any romantic feelings for her, and that they weren't in a relationship. However, in Liz and Caroline's coverage, having the advantage of being in court, they appeared to take Mr. Johnson's assertion of Dr. A being Lucy's boyfriend as a serious statement and not a joke. One of Mr. Johnson's assertions must therefore be untrue, it would appear. If you're inclined to be generous to the court system, you might say that the prosecution is opposed to her and entitled to undermine her by any means, but in that case you have to concede that what the prosecution says is not only not definitive evidence, but that the jury, and any observers, should be explicitly warned that anything said by the prosecutor is, in its own terms, quite simply not to be believed. This obvious point never seems to have even crossed the minds of any of the mainstream commenters who attended the trial. It's uncontentious that Dr. A was at least a close friend of Lucy for nearly a year after she was removed from the unit. This might seem odd, given how obvious it's supposed to be that she's a mass murderer, yet Dr. A failed to spot that the large number of babies that he was bleeped to attend had collapsed while stable and healthy, seemingly the first ever in history to do so. He claimed to Thirlwell that Letby manipulated him, but he didn't explain, or wasn't asked, how this was done. He had offered a clinical opinion to Lucy during their many conversations that it's not you, it's the babies, and made her promise not to even doubt herself again. How did he arrive at this conclusion exactly? If Letby is guilty, he must be either incredibly incompetent or incredibly vulnerable to manipulation, when even the intellectual heights of Paul Hughes and Liz Hull are able to see through it. You might therefore wonder how he's kept his job. While 3 managers at the Countess have faced arrest for failing to stop Lucy, how has Dr. A been treated so leniently? He was involved, at least since the second Inchling case, and, if Lucy's guilty, failed to spot the unequivocal poisoning case in front of him. Maybe that's not his area of expertise, we don't know of course because we don't know who he is. But his timely intervention at that stage would, according to the prosecution case, have stopped the two murders that followed. Dr. A's cursory treatment by the Thirlwell inquiry is in fact so lenient that it raises questions again about the real aim of the inquiry. If its aim is to find out how Lucy wasn't spotted, one might think Dr. A is the key to this. He was, after all, either her boyfriend or her close friend, depending which of Mr. Johnson's statements you believe. He reassured her and tried to help her evade justice, even if unwittingly, and tried to get her back to work, either at the Countess or at a different hospital. If the aim is to ensure another offender doesn't slip through the net, Dr. A would seem to be target number one of addressing future behaviour. On the other hand, his input would probably be seen as less helpful if the real aim of the inquiry was from day one to firm up the crumbling convictions, an aim, I would add, which has also failed. Then we move to this clip from the Hummingbird promotional video about police assistance given to witnesses. The desire is said to be to achieve best evidence, which is a horrible piece of jargon which disguises an unpleasant bias in my view. It's difficult to see how the evidence is made more truthful or more relevant by anonymity, but it is easier to understand why it might seem less amenable to the problems Lucy Letby was criticised for by the press, that is, struggling with anxiety or becoming confused, for example.
I found that was a central part of my assessment, and a lot that's missing, I think, from a lot of this commentary that we're seeing at the moment.
The reason given for Dr. A's anonymity was, among other things, claimed to be anxiety. Appearing anxious is not a good indicator of truthfulness. However, in the popular mentality it is often wrongly thought to be, and this seems to be the quality that's being described as made best by the assistance given. Although the police don't state that Dr. A is one of the witnesses referred to here, it seems obvious he's up there with the most likely candidates for this. He initially met the accusations against Lucy with negativity, in his messages with her, and is the person who knew her best. He's also on record as one of the people most accommodated by these assistance provisions. Lucy, on the other hand, while also suffering from clinical anxiety and PTSD, was not given the same provisions and was not allowed to remain anonymous or behind a screen. Her struggling with her answers and alleged lack of emotion are central to some commentators' assessment of her guilt. If she had been offered and accepted the option of being behind a screen, no doubt that decision would also have been deemed telling in a way it wasn't for prosecution witnesses. If your response to this is to say, well, she's the one accused of awful things, congratulations, you've just discovered the concept of the circular argument that's so embedded in the case. Dr. A's and other witnesses' accommodations to achieve better evidence from them appear on the face of it to cause a problem with Article 6 rights. One of the minimum rights given by Article 6 is explicitly stated to be to examine or have examined witnesses against him and to obtain the attendance and examination of witnesses on his behalf under the same conditions as witnesses against him. The witness on her behalf here being Lucy herself. There doesn't appear to be a great deal of scope to claim that that provision was met in this case. However, when I looked for case law on this, I was surprised to learn that not only has there never been a case on this point, but that the approach of the European Court of Human Rights is not to consider any of the minimum rights as separately enforceable at all. The only test it applies is to consider the fairness of the proceedings as a whole. There's not much hope for change on that front, as this approach by the court is likely considered as a defensive measure to being seen as overly interventionist, such as by enforcing the actual rights the Convention grants, for example. No modern populist government is likely to do anything to improve on these rights, to the apparent benefit of terrorists or child murderers. Going forward, once the seemingly inevitable quashing of the convictions eventually happens, Cheshire Police's interactions with Dr. A seem worthy of considerable scrutiny. As the claimed boyfriend, he would normally have been first in line to be charged as a co-defendant in any other child harm case. Was he asked by the police about his clinical evidence that it wasn't Lucy, but the health of the babies that was to blame, for example? What did they say to him to make him change his mind about this opinion? Was he offered any incentives to do so? The next inquiry should be ready to look into this. From For another thing, where did Mr. Johnson even get the idea that Dr. A was Lucy's boyfriend? You have to wonder if the prosecution had more information on his relationship with Lucy, such that it was quite convenient for him to comply enough that using it in court was never necessary. By complying, meaning withdrawing his own opinion that Lucy had done nothing wrong very suddenly, he potentially saved himself an awful lot of involvement that by this point he quite likely didn't want. As for the minimal interaction he has had with the Thirlwall inquiry, I'll leave you with some of these extracts courtesy of the Trial podcast. Thanks for listening.
Just spoke to a paediatric intensive care unit. They're optimistic he'll be okay. Smiling emoji.
So Miss Langdale asked him whether he thought it was appropriate to have been discussing baby N's condition in this way.
In hindsight, no. I've shared too much.
But that he's got no concerns about any mismanagement of his care or suspicions that anyone was to blame.
How can you say that there were no concerns about mismanagement or suspicions when no one knew how the death had arisen? Until that has been investigated, you can't assert there were no concerns, can you?
I think what I'm meaning is that there was no event attributable to that decline.
Dr. John Gibbs started asking questions.
Miss Langdale said the messages between the pair began after Lucy Letby clocked off, later that evening at around 10:45 p.m.
Do I need to be worried about what Dr. Gibbs was asking?
No, he was asking to make sure...
He admitted it had been an error for him to pass on information about that meeting, and later to forward a confidential email to her from Dr. Stephen Breary, which said Baby O and Baby P's deaths would be investigated by the coroner. The email made reference to things we discussed that might not be in the notes, which Dr. Yu accepted may well have been a reference to concerns about Lucy Letby. And
at the time he made the request to Alder Hay, he thought Lucy Letby was still meeting patients.
She was still having patient contact at that time. My understanding was that she was conducting the clinical audit in the obstetric or gynecology outpatient department and had been to somewhere else within the Countess to cover an audit of.
This is the perfume I wore, this is the hotel